with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, he'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Hello folks, we're back in Dorset again this week, but we're not in the Winterbourne Valley this time. No. We are in the Store Valley instead. So it's still named after a river, but none of these villages have the name Store in them like the Winterbournes did. However, we are going to be seeing a couple of Winterbournes later this week, but they can wait their turn. Today we're in a village that's got a very fine pub here on its main road. That's the Charlton Inn, and it's in Charlton Marshall. Charlton Marshall, peasant's farm belonging to the Marshall family. This week in Dorset, we're temporarily moving away from the Winterbourne Valley, which we followed last week, but by the end, we'll be back in it. For the first 3 episodes though, we have some villages just to the east to cover. This is Charlton Marshall, and it's not in the Winterbourne Valley. Rather, it's in the Store Valley, a well-known part of Dorset that was once used heavily by the Romans. There's loads of evidence for that in the form of villas and farm sites found throughout it. Although no major Roman building is recorded directly in Charlton Marshall, the landscape was once part of the wider farming zones they used, and the river here was likely extremely important to them. Of course, back then, Charlton Marshall didn't exist in its current form. The name Charlton comes from the Old English Chailton, meaning the farmer's settlement or the peasant's farm. The second part, Marshall, comes from the Marshall family, who held the manor in the medieval period. After being held by the Marshall family, the manor was later taken over by the Bishop of Salisbury and then by various gentry families. Manorial records show a long tradition of farming, rents and land management tied to the estate. Charlton Marshall developed along the River Store and later along the main road between Blandford Forum and Poole, with the main centre being the area around the church and the river crossing. Houses and small farms lined the road, and the fertile valley supported crops and livestock. Later, a railway line would come along. During the 18th century, the road through the village became a turnpike, increasing traffic between Blandford and Poole. Inns and roadside houses developed along the route, and soon Charlton Marshall had become a thriving village. The importance of the church was also growing. The nave and the chancel were rebuilt in 1713 and again in the Victorian period. The population grew and new houses appeared along the main road. Latterly, that railway line between Blandford and Poole came along too. The village kept its long, linear shape along the main road throughout it all, and that's still its biggest defining feature today. The railway line closed in the 1960s, but the main road remained a busy route. Since then, there's been another expansion in the form of newer housing estates. Today, important landmarks still include St Mary's Church, the River Store, the old Turnpike Road, and several listed buildings, such as Georgian houses and historic cottages. The church tower is the most recognisable feature. Let's go and find it, shall we? Charlton Marshall's boundaries extend a long way to the west. Before we can get into the village itself, we have 2 small hamlets to discuss. This one is called Charesworth, which sits in some chalk hills southwest of Charlton Marshall. The land around Charesworth developed into a farming area over the centuries, and as such it was centred around Charesworth Farm, a traditional mixed farm growing wheat, barley and oilseed rape. Today, Charesworth Farm keeps cattle, sheep, pigs, horses, turkeys, chickens and geese. The farm is known for its free-range bronze turkeys, which are sold at Christmas. It also runs a growing log business, delivering firewood across Dorset. In the summer, Charesworth Farm hosts weddings, glamping and camping. And then there's the small matter of the Teddy Rocks Festival, which began in 2011 as a small gig in a pub in Blandford, raising £400 for charity. That early event laid the foundation for a much larger festival that would later move to Charesworth. Each year it grew, showing strong support for its cause of helping children with cancer. In 2015, Teddy Rocks raised £24,000, and in 2016 it raised £42,800 after moving to a larger venue. By 2018, it had relocated to Charesworth Farm, where it raised £83,000, a record at the time. It didn't stop there. In 2019, the festival sold out and raised £107,000. Even after the challenges of 2020 and the COVID pandemic, the festival returned in 2022 and raised £60,000. In total, Teddy Rocks has raised over £500,000 since 2011. What began as a small gig is now a 3-day festival with over 100 acts across multiple stages. It includes activities such as fairground rides, comedy tents, and axe throwing. Teddy Rocks has won awards too, including Best Festival for Families 2024. Just up the road from Charesworth is the hamlet of Thornicombe. Several prehistoric features lie near Thornicombe, such as Bolbarrow southwest of Haywards Farm and a Roman villa on Little Barton Hill. The name Thornicombe appears to follow a pattern of place names ending in combe, which often indicate a Saxon origin, meaning a valley. Thornicombe likely formed during the early medieval period when Saxon farming settlements spread across Dorset. The Domesday entry shows that Thornicombe had a ploughland, meaning enough land for a team of 8 oxen to plough in a year. That confirms that Thornicombe was a small agricultural settlement during the medieval period. In the 1700s, Dorset saw improvements in farming methods, and the land around Thornicombe would have been part of that change. Thornicombe first appears on 19th century maps as a small cluster of homes and farms south of Blandford Forum. It's still the same today. Our first stop in Charlton Marshall is the Charlton Inn. By the 1800s, Charlton Marshall had grown enough to support shops, farms and 2 public houses. One of the latter was the Charlton Inn, which was first mentioned in Kelly's Directory in 1855. The other pub was the Bricklayers Arms, which is now closed, but the Charlton Inn remains active, whilst other local buildings changed use or were turned into private houses. The Charlton Inn is a traditional Dorset country pub with a rustic appearance. It has a traditional bar and an idyllic beer garden. Inside, it retains older elements such as timber framing, thick walls, and a layout typical of 19th century inns. It even has open fires in the winter. The pub stands on the A350, the major road that links Blandford Forum with Poole. Its position continues the original purpose of the building as a roadside inn, built to serve people moving through the area. The Charlton Inn is closely connected to Hall and Woodhouse Brewery, which is based in Blandford Forum. It serves Badger and Outland beers from that brewery. It can also offer 6 ensuite guest rooms and a dining area too. Now, in the last half a century, Charlton Marshall has grown significantly, with more than 5 times as many homes as in the mid-19th century. The rise in population increased the need for a central building where local groups could meet. So then, here we have the parish centre, which was created to meet that need. It's located at the Close. The parish centre hosts scheduled activities including meetings of the Stroke Association Group, arts and crafts groups, and the monthly parish council meeting. You can also buy things here at certain times. During its regular coffee drop-in, you can buy stamps, cards, stationery, homemade cakes, preserves, and second-hand books. You can also pick up free local papers, such as the Blackmore Vale magazine, the Forum Focus, and the 3 Villages News. The parish centre includes a small kitchen, which allows volunteers to prepare drinks and simple food during events such as the coffee drop-in. It also has a photocopy machine available for public use. Okay, next job is to walk a little bit to the north towards the church here, which is just out of sight, just beyond these houses here. Let's check it out. Now, there's no doubt in my mind, and indeed in many other people's, that St Mary's Church in Charlton Marshall is the most important landmark here. The earliest known part of St Mary's Church is its late 15th century west tower, which survives from the medieval building that once stood on the site. Most of the present church, though, was rebuilt in 1713, with the date recorded on the nave wall. Further work was carried out in 1728, as shown by a date marker on a tower drainpipe. The rebuilding was probably done by the Bastard brothers of Blandford, well-known architects. They worked for Dr. Sloper, a key figure in the parish at the time. The work saw them use a mixture of materials like flint, green sandstone and ashlar dressings, which are typical materials for Dorset churches of the period. St Mary's Church has a clear exterior layout. It includes a nave with a continuous chancel, a north aisle, an organ chamber, a south porch, and that 15th century west tower. The tower has 2 stages separated by a weathered string course and features square set buttresses. There are perpendicular style belfry windows and an 18th century parapet with pediments and obelisks topped with ball finials. The porch has a semicircular arch with an ashlar surround and a sundial finial at the top. The interior of St Mary's Church is described as a fine example of 18th century design, with many original fittings believed to come from the Bastard workshops of Blandford. It has a lofty oak pulpit, inlaid and topped with a canopy, and above it sits a gilt pelican. There are also 4 bells in the tower and a clock, which was added in 1911, donated by the Reverend S.A. Walker. The main 18th century windows have semicircular heads with ashlar architraves and contain leaded lights, typical of the period's classical influence. Memorials-wise, there's one to Dr. Sloper, who died in 1727. There are also tablets to members of the Bastard family, and together these link the building directly to the people responsible for shaping its present form. Okay, so we've turned onto Gravel Lane. Behind me you can see some water. That is the River Store. Now we'll be seeing this a few times this week, most notably tomorrow actually, because we'll be stood on a bridge that goes over it. We won't see much of it here in Charlton Marshall, but you do get a nice view of it just as you enter Gravel Lane. It's quite nice, looks quite peaceful this morning, doesn't it? Now, from here, we're heading this way. Follow me. Down Gravel Lane, we'll have to see another religious building, although this one is no longer in use. On Gravel Lane we come to a former chapel. This began its life as a Wesleyan meeting place, and it may stand on or near the site of Joseph Compton's registered house from 1799. That was the first official meeting house in the village. By 1887, Ordnance Survey maps showed a chapel in the close, but the Gravel Lane chapel remained, and soon it was to be used by the Primitive Methodists and the Independents rather than the Wesleyans. There is no record of internal memorials inside this chapel. That's consistent with nonconformist practice, as Primitive Methodist and Independent chapels rarely installed them. However, the chapel is linked to several important families throughout its history. The Compton family is one of them, but also worth a mention here are Charles and Sarah Easton, prominent workers in the Primitive Methodist movement in Charlton Marshall during the late 19th century. Now closed today, the old chapel on Gravel Lane survives as a private house, but it still represents over 200 years of nonconformist religious history in Charlton Marshall. Historical surveys show that 3 early settlements once stood next to the river here in Charlton Marshall. Those early clusters of homes influenced the long shape of the modern village and created a pattern of riverside working areas. Such locations were ideal for trades that needed water, including milling, dyeing, and perhaps most notably, tanning. This next area is the site of the old tannery. Its existence is confirmed by the modern name Tannery Court, which stands on the site today. Tanneries were usually built where water, transport routes, and labour were all easily available. Charlton Marshall had all three. The River Store supplied the water for soaking and washing skins. Charlton Marshall's agricultural surroundings would have supplied the raw materials. Tannery Court is completely residential now, with no visible signs of the former tannery buildings. The site now forms part of the residential expansion that's taken place in Charlton Marshall over the last 50 years. Okay, we found our way to a footpath here, which is quite handy, because what this does is it takes us from the main road to a much quieter part of Charlton Marshall, which is away from that main road. When we get there, we'll be talking about a little street that's got an interesting name. It used to be a little hamlet of its own, but now it's been absorbed into the village. Now we're on a narrow lane called Charlton on the Hill. This is believed to have been one of the original clusters of buildings that lay alongside the river. If not, it was very close. The hilltop this is on would have been used for grazing or small-scale farming. The hilltop position gave it good views over the Store Valley, which was important for farming and for transport. Historic Ordnance Survey maps from 1895 and 1897 show Charlton on the Hill as a small, independent settlement south of Blandford Forum. The maps confirm that the hamlet existed as a recognised place by the late 19th century, slightly separated from the main village of Charlton Marshall, which was growing along the road that would become the A350. The surrounding land formed part of the Blackmore Vale. By the late 20th century, Charlton on the Hill continued to appear on Ordnance Survey maps as a locality within Charlton Marshall Parish, but now its identity as a separate settlement has gone. What with the growth of the main village, this has been subsumed. Our next task is to walk along the track bed of the former railway line that Charlton Marshall once had. Along with the neighbouring village of Spetisbury, Charlton was a stop on the Somerset and Dorset Joint Railway. That reached the Charlton Marshall area in the 1860s, forming part of a major route linking Bath and Bournemouth together. The line officially opened through this section in 1863, meaning that trains were passing through Charlton Marshall more than 60 years before a halt was built. Charlton Marshall Halt was officially opened in 1928 by the Southern Railway. It was built to serve the growing number of small rural settlements along the line and to provide a stopping point between Blandford Forum and Baileygate. The halt was simple in design and was one of several small stops added during the 1920s to increase local passenger use. It consisted of two short platforms, each long enough for only a single locomotive, a tender and a single carriage. The halt stood in a cutting, meaning the platforms were below the level of the surrounding land. It was all built of concrete, but it had simple shelters, likely of timber or corrugated iron. The cutting walls were earth and chalk, matching the local geology of the Store Valley. Passenger numbers were always low, but the halt provided a useful stopping point for villagers who otherwise had to walk to Blandford Forum or Spetisbury. Even after regular passenger services ended in 1956, the halt continued to be used by pupils from Claysmore Preparatory School. They travelled from London Waterloo at the start of every term, with 6 trains per year stopping at the halt. The final school train used the halt on the 17th of December 1963, marking the last recorded passenger use of the station. So what of the line then? Well, now the old trackbed has become the North Dorset Trailway. It closed completely in 1966 as part of the Beeching Cuts, ending more than a century of railway use through Charlton Marshall. The track was then lifted, leaving the route unused for several decades. The closure was widely opposed, and the line later gained a legendary status among railway historians, with more than 100 books written about it. The trackbed remained unused until local groups and councils began restoring sections for public use again. The North Dorset Trailway was created by refurbishing or replacing bridges and clearing the old trackbed. Now it provides a long, continuous route for walking, cycling and horse riding. Today, the section at Charlton Marshall forms part of the southern end of the trailway. It begins near Blandford Forum and continues south towards Spetisbury. It follows the exact same cutting used by the railway, giving its users a sense of the original landscape. Okay, so there are several places you can access this old railway line from the village of Charlton Marshall. You've just seen where we came down onto the line at Charlton on the Hill, but you can also get to it from several of the housing estates, like this one, for example. The one I'm going to leave the line at is the one that takes us to the playground, the recreation ground, and then we'll form a loop around the housing estate close to that and then go back to the main road. We've got the village hall to see as well in this last section. From the old railway line, you can access Hopegood Close and by extension the QE2 playing field, which is owned and maintained by the parish council. This field gained QE2 Fields in Trust status in 2012 as part of the Queen's Diamond Jubilee programme. The playground within it sits beside a dedicated car park used by both playing field visitors and the North Dorset Trailway users. That makes it easy to reach on foot, by bike or indeed by car. The playground was recently refurbished with modern equipment suitable for different ages. It includes slides, swings and climbing structures, along with a secure fence section designed for younger children. The field is a larger open space that contains football nets and fitness equipment, offering sport and exercise for everyone. Charlton Marshall's first village hall stood on the same site as the present building and was a wooden structure built in the mid-1930s. That earlier hall served the village for decades, but became expensive to run and no longer met modern standards. By the early 2000s, local discussions began about replacing it. A major redevelopment project led to the construction of the new Charlton Marshall Village Hall in 2019, designed with modern standards in mind, including accessibility, energy efficiency and improved facilities. It contains a main hall with a stage seating up to 100 people and a first floor meeting room overlooking the Store Valley, both of which are fully accessible via a lift. It also includes a professional quality kitchen with a servery opening directly into the main hall. The hall has long hosted local clubs and societies like the Brownies, the Cubs, yoga, tai chi, short mat bowls, toddler groups, craft fairs and film nights. It remains one of the most modern village halls in North Dorset, with 25 parking spaces, including 3 for disabled visitors. Charlton Marshall's position on a raised terrace above the River Stour has influenced everything here, from early farming patterns to the routes taken by its roads, its railway, and later the North Dorset Trailway. It's unusual in having several distinct localities like Charlton on the Hill, Thornicombe and Charisworth, each with its own past and its own role in the wider area. They all grew at different times and for different reasons. Modern Charlton Marshall has grown, but it has kept strong links to its past. The playground, the QE2 playing field and the trailway all provide outdoor space that's used daily. The trailway in particular has become a defining feature. It's a lovely village, so let's move on to the next one and see if it can top it.
I'm standing in the cutting where the chalk walls meet the sky. Two short platforms waiting under Charlton's watchful eye. The star drifts through the valley past the farms and fields below, where Charisworth keeps turkeys and Thornicombe stays slow. I hear the past in every footstep on this worn down track. Old routes and old routines pulling me back. Charlton Marshall, hold me here a while, where the turnpike road once carried every mile, where the church tower stands and the trailway runs, and the halt still dreams of the southern railways runs. Charlton Marshall, keep me on this ground till the next small train makes its gentle sound. The tannery is housing now, the chapel's just a home, but the brothers' work still shapes the place I roam. Charisworth's festival shakes the hills each spring, and the playground by the trailway hears the children sing. I feel the pull of every village in the valley sweep, their memories held in the cut where the platforms sleep. Charlton Marshall, hold me here a while, where the turnpike road once carried every mile, where the church tower stands and the trailway runs, and the halt still dreams of the southern railways runs. Charlton Marshall, keep me on this ground till the next small train makes its gentle sound. Claysmore pupils once waited here, 6 trains a year through the dust and the clear. Now only footsteps and bicycles glide, but the valley still hums with its old countryside. Charlton Marshall, hold me here a while, where the turnpike road once carried every mile, where the church tower stands and the trailway runs, and the halt still dreams of the southern railways runs. Charlton Marshall, keep me on this ground till the next small train makes its gentle sound. Let the river roll on and the old farm stay, while I wait for a ride on a long lost railway.
Hello folks, welcome back to Dorset for another episode. Now in this episode we're going to be taking a very long elongated walk. Basically we're going down and then back up again. We're going to use a road to do part of that, but the other part of it is going to be done on the old railway line that we were on briefly yesterday. Here you can see it runs through this village and crosses this bridge here. Now you can get up onto that bridge by using a set of steps just there, and also just up there was once a station which is apparently now been refurbished and looks pretty good. We'll see if it is. This is the parish of Spetisbury. Spetisbury, Woodpecker Fort. Today we're moving south through the Store Valley here in Dorset and we come to another long linear village. This is Spetisbury, which is a village that shows very early human activity, there's no question about that. The most important ancient feature here is Spetisbury Rings, an early Iron Age hill fort. It forms part of a chain of earthworks running along the Store Valley, including Hambledon Hill and Hod Hill. Spetisbury Rings was a defended site used by the Duro-Chirigis tribe. During the building of the railway through the village in the 1850s, 2 mass graves were found near the rings. Over 80 skeletons were uncovered, some with spearheads and weapons. That suggests there was a violent clash, possibly between the Britons and Roman forces. After the Roman period, the Store Valley continued to support farming. Springs, fords and fertile land encouraged small settlements. The later medieval layout of Spetisbury, with clusters at Middle Street and Great Crawford, likely grew from those early patterns. The name Spetisbury comes from Old English. Speot or spet means woodpecker and bring means earthwork or fort. The name refers to the hill fort of the village and the green woodpeckers found in the area. Spetisbury became a recognised parish in the medieval period. A church has stood here since Norman times, showing that the settlement was already established and organised by the 11th or 12th century. The parish later included several small manors that gradually merged. The Domesday Book recorded 2 manors in the area, Spetisbury and Great Crawford. Together, they had around 30 households, making the area a moderately sized rural settlement for the time. In the Middle Ages, Spetisbury consisted of 3 manors as Middle Street was added. By the 18th century, Francis Fane owned most of the parish, and by 1869 the Drax estate held much of the land. That explains the unusual house numbering system here, as only Drax-owned houses were numbered. Spetisbury was centred around farming, but other small crafts such as blacksmithing, baking, butchery and dairying supported village life. The River Store provided water, fish and reeds for basket making too. A major fire in 1905 destroyed part of the village, starting at its bakery. Some thatched cob cottages survived and several still stand today. Since then it's rebuilt itself nicely, and what we have now is a great little village, and it's full of character. So let's go and see it. So yesterday we walked along part of the North Dorset Trailway when we were exploring Charlton Marshall. That line also passed through Spetisbury, and like Charlton, this had a station. Spetisbury Railway Station opened on the 1st of November 1860. It was part of the Dorset Central Railway, a small independent company which had been authorised in 1856. The line was completed in September 1860, though the official opening was delayed slightly due to the need for a larger turntable at Wimborne. The station originally had 1 platform. It included a timber booking office and waiting rooms. Early records show that by 1888 the platform was extended and a brick-built ladies' waiting room was added at a cost of £94. The foundations of these buildings can still be seen today. Spetisbury became part of the Somerset and Dorset Railway when the Dorset Central Railway merged with the Somerset Central Railway. The station layout changed significantly in around 1900 when the line between Blandford and Baileygate was doubled. A new 300-foot platform opened in 1901, complete with a brick station building. The original platform was also extended to match the new length. The rear wall of the 1901 building still survives today, holding back the field behind the station. The station was downgraded to an unstaffed halt in 1934 and renamed Spetisbury Halt. It closed to passengers in 1956, but the track remained in place until the closure of the Blandford Goods Terminal in 1969, after which it was lifted. In recent years, volunteers have cleared the site, uncovering the platform remains, building foundations and artefacts. Their work has made the station accessible again and preserved its historic features. Now, station's a fascinating enough stop along this old railway line, but if you keep walking along it for about, 100 metres or so, you come to something that's a little bit more spectacular. You see, Dorset is very, very well known for its huge collection of earthworks and barrows and all kinds of ancient stuff, which is scattered throughout the county. Here in Spetisbury, there's one particular set of earthworks that everybody knows. They call them Spetisbury Rings. Now, if you walk along the route of the line, it's not far until you reach the best known feature of this entire village. These are the Spetisbury Rings, which are also called Crawford Castle. It's an Iron Age hill fort located on a spur above the River Stour. It's one of several Iron Age earthworks along the Stour Valley, forming part of a chain that includes Hambledon Hill, Hod Hill, Busbury Rings, Badbury Rings, Dudsbury Camp and the fortified port at Hengistbury Head. Archaeological records describe Spetisbury Rings as a univalent hill fort, meaning it has a single rampart and a ditch. The enclosed area covers roughly 5 acres. The rampart varies in height around the circuit. In 1972, the best preserved section stood 15 feet above the interior and 25 feet above the ditch bottom. The ditch, which is now partly filled, was originally V-shaped up to 45 feet wide and between 4 and 7 feet deep. A small excavation in 1958 confirmed the ditch's profile. The entrance lies on the northwestern side, formed by a simple gap with slightly everted rampart ends. Near this entrance is a disturbed mound that may represent the remains of a hornwork, which was an additional defensive feature. The southern angle of the fort reaches the greatest height, while the rampart gradually lowers towards the northeast, where the later railway construction damaged the earthworks. One of the most dramatic discoveries at Spetisbury Rings occurred during the building of that railway line. The railway cutting sliced through the northeastern part of the hill fort, exposing the ditch fill. Workers uncovered what appeared to be a mass grave. At least 80 skeletons were removed in 1857, and another 40 were found the following year. Some of the skeletons showed signs of a violent death. 2 skulls were perforated and one skeleton still had a spearhead embedded in it. Weapons and objects found with the bodies included iron spearheads, a sword, a bronze cauldron, bucket handles and various personal ornaments. The presence of so many bodies along with weapons suggests there was a battle or some sort of massacre here. The exact event is unknown, but it may relate to conflicts between local tribes or clashes with Roman forces during their advance into Dorset. This is not totally implausible. The Stour Valley was an important route in prehistoric times. The river slopes offered good ground for settlement and farming, and the hill fort's position would have allowed its occupants to monitor travel along the valley and defend it accordingly. There's nobody defending it now. Spetisbury Rings is accessible to visitors who can walk the ramparts and view the surrounding landscape. It remains an important feature in local history and archaeology, offering an insight into Iron Age life, defence and conflict. Take it from me, people, if you want to go and see the Spetisbury Rings, you need decent footwear, because the access path to get to it is extremely slippery at this time of year. I've had to use tree branches and all sorts to make sure I steady myself getting down from them. There's quite a steep incline, but to be fair, once you're up there it does look really good, doesn't it? It's a cracking view across Dorset. Hopefully we'll see a bit more of that this week. Now we're on the other side of the A350 and we're on Crawford Bridge. This is one of Dorset's most important historic river crossings, with its origins in the medieval period. It spans the River Stour on the road between Spetisbury and Tarrant Crawford. Crawford Bridge is recorded as early as 1235, when it appeared in a charter of the Abbey of Tarrant Crawford. That makes it one of the oldest documented bridges in Dorset. In 1506, an indulgence of 40 days was granted for its repair. The modern bridge is built of coursed rubble and ashlar. Its most distinctive features are its 9 semicircular arches, which rise slightly towards the centre of the span. The structure also includes 3 narrow land arches at the northern end and a short section of brickwork without an arch. The western side of Crawford Bridge is the medieval section. It includes triangular cutwaters at each pier, designed to break the force of the river. On alternate piers, those cutwaters rise up to road level and form pedestrian refuges. The eastern side of the bridge is later rebuilt in 1819 when the road was widened. That created a contrast between the medieval west side with its cutwaters and refuges and the plainer east side, which has neither. Now we're walking north up the A350. Now between here and the village hall there were once 3 chapels, all of which supported nonconformist groups. They were a primitive Methodist chapel, a congregational chapel and a Roman Catholic convent chapel. The best documented is the primitive Methodist chapel, built in 1842. The movement first missioned around the village in 1834, preaching in a hired house for several years until a cottage and a garden were purchased and a purpose-built chapel was erected on the garden plot. The chapel measured 24 feet by 16 with walls of hard brick, a roof of blue slate and a memel deal floor resting on oak sleepers. It had 4 sash windows, folding entrance doors and an internal height of 13 feet. Construction cost £90, with £10 donated by the circuit steward, Mr. Hunt. The chapel was later enlarged in 1862 and remained active into the 20th century before closing and passing into private use. Now, as far as Spetisbury's congregational chapel goes, a little less survives in written detail. The chapel appears in Stell's 1991 inventory of nonconformist chapels and meeting houses in southwest England, which confirms its use by an independent congregation. It may have closed by the early 20th century, as no modern records of services survive. The third nonconformist place of worship in the village was the Roman Catholic chapel attached to Spetisbury House Convent, founded in the early 19th century. The convent was widely noted in Victorian descriptions as one of the richest in England. The convent housed a resident order of nuns and maintained its own chapel for worship. Although not a public chapel, it functioned as a separate religious institution. The convent closed in the 1920s, and the building later became a school, before being partly converted into housing. The village hall at Spetisbury stands in an area called Middle Street, which once formed one of the 3 medieval manors of the parish. Middle Street is specifically identified as the area around the village hall today. One of the most important facts about the village hall is linked to a religious past. This is confirmed by the parish council's historical summary, which states that the village hall was once part of a nunnery. The nunnery in question was the Augustinian priory at Tarrant Crawford, a short distance south of the village. Although the priory itself stood outside Spetisbury, it owned land and buildings within Spetisbury itself. The buildings, later adapted into the village hall, were likely part of the priory's local estate and were used for agricultural and domestic purposes. After the dissolution of the monasteries in the 1530s, these properties passed into private hands. By 1869, ownership had passed to the Drax estate, which controlled much of the village. Although the exact date of its conversion into a village hall is not known, this was in use as such by the late 19th or early 20th century.
Yes, old religious houses aren't the easiest things to research, but there's no religious houses along the road these days. It's mainly all housing, apart from that village hall. I'll tell you something that is a little bit easier to find out things about, and that would be pubs. Now, if you carry on walking up here, you get to an old pub called the Woodpecker, but you won't be getting a pint in there anytime soon.
Okay, let's talk a bit about the Woodpecker. Now, for many years, this was the last remaining public house in the village. The building is early Victorian, and for most of its life it traded under a different name, the Drax Arms, a reference to the powerful Drax family. The pub's renaming to the Woodpecker came later, part of a modernisation effort after a period of closure. Spetisbury once had at least 5 pubs, including this. The others were the Castle Inn, the Black Dog, the Buglehorn and the Railway Inn. Over time, all of them except the Woodpecker closed. The Railway Inn, for example, shut in 1986, and the others disappeared even earlier, often due to fire or changing ownership. It left the Woodpecker as the village's only surviving public house by the late 20th century. During the 2010s, the Woodpecker gained a strong reputation. It won the East Dorset Camera Rural Pub of the Year, praised for its well-kept ales and good food. It offered several regional ales, including Flax Double Drop, Buckham Union, Summer Lightning and Sixpenny IPA. Despite its popularity, the Woodpecker closed in 2019, and Dorset Council later confirmed that the building was no longer in use as a pub. A nomination to list it as an asset of community value was rejected because the council judged that future pub use was unlikely. At the northern end of the village now, we have St John the Baptist Church. It's a building with a long history combining medieval stonework, Victorian rebuilding and several notable monuments. Much of the present structure dates from the 19th century. The earliest visible part of the church is the north arcade, which dates from the late 12th or early 13th century. The arcade includes cylindrical columns, typical of early medieval church design. These columns survived the later rebuilding of the nave and were restored in 1858. The tower is the next oldest part of the building. It was built in the late 15th or early 16th century during the Perpendicular Gothic period. It's constructed of banded flint and rubble, and there's some heathstone used in the masonry. It contains 6 bells. The church underwent major reconstruction in the mid-19th century. The architect T.H. Wyatt, a prominent Victorian church restorer, rebuilt the chancel and the porch in 1858. The Victorian work also included a barrel-vaulted chancel roof. An old drawing preserved inside the church shows that before the Victorian rebuilding, the north wall of the chancel had a round-headed window, probably Norman or early medieval. That window no longer survives. Also inside the church is a canopied mural table tomb dated 1599, dedicated to John Bowyer. That monument is one of the most important surviving features from the late Tudor period, mentioned as it is in the Royal Commission's 1970 inventory and in Pevsner's Buildings of England. Outside stands a distinctive 3-sided pyramid gravestone, or trihedron. It commemorates the Reverend Thomas Rackett, who died in 1840. He was a well-known antiquarian and a scientist, and a friend of George Romney, who almost certainly painted him while staying in the village. Now we come to the school, Spetisbury Church of England Primary School. Today it teaches children aged 4 to 11, but before it existed, education in the village was provided through small parish-run classes and church-linked instruction. Although detailed early records for Spetisbury are limited, by the 20th century, Spetisbury had a recognised Church of England school serving the village and the surrounding area. It operated as voluntary aided. The school's modern form began in 2014 when it became an academy converter under the Diocese of Salisbury Academy Trust, which oversees several Church of England schools across Dorset and Wiltshire. It has a capacity of 210 pupils, with 184 enrolled as per the most recent government data.
Okay, so if you turn left at the school, you're on another little road that passes under the former railway line, and if you walk through the school's car park, you can access a ramp that will take you up to that line. And basically, we're just going to follow the old line now back down to where we started. However, when we get to where we started, I have one final landmark, on foot at least, to show you. Alright. I'll wait for you.
Sorry.
It's alright, I'll wait for you.
The final landmark on the walk is a building known as the Summer House. It's known in earlier records as Monk's Mulberry or the Garden Tower. It stands on a site long associated with a Benedictine priory founded in the early 12th century. Although no medieval structures survive above ground, the location is one of the most historically important in the village. The priory at Spetisbury was founded by Robert de Beaumont, Earl of Leicester and Meulan, who was a leading nobleman under Henry I. After the king's reconquest of Normandy in 1106, Henry rewarded Robert with the manor of Spetisbury. Robert then established a small Benedictine cell on his estate and granted it, along with land to support the monks, to the Abbey of St. Pierre de Preaux in Normandy. This made Spetisbury an alien priory, a religious house in England controlled by a mother house in France. Such houses were common after the Norman conquest, but they became politically sensitive during later wars with the French. The priory remained under the control of the French for more than 2 centuries. It was a small house, probably occupied by only a few monks, and its income was modest. During the 100 Years' War, alien priories were viewed with suspicion because they sent revenue to France. After the dissolution of the monasteries, the priory lands were granted in 1543 to Charles Blount, Lord Mountjoy, marking the end of monastic occupation at Spetisbury. The priory buildings soon fell into decay, and by the early modern period, nothing identifiable remained above the ground. Now, there is some debate as to whether or not it actually stood here. Excavations in the basement of Cedar Lodge, which is a house near the church, uncovered 13th and 14th century occupation layers. That suggests that part of the buildings may have stood there. The summer house location is supported by Ordnance Survey maps, which labels the structure as summer house on the site of a Benedictine priory. Although it incorporates an 18th century gazebo, no medieval fabric survives here. It could well be that it sits on something that was associated with the priory, probably a garden pavilion or a gazebo for a nearby house. Its alternative name, the Garden Tower, supports that interpretation.
Okay, back to the car it is. Now, before we leave Spetisbury behind, we've got one more thing I want to drive to. Now, this is a long way to the southwest of the village. It's got something to do with the City of London, and you might think, well, blimey, we're a long way from London here, aren't we? Well, we are. Dorset is a long way from central London. But there is a landmark here that supplies part of London with power. Away to the southwest of Spetisbury, it's all farmland, but on that farmland these days, there's a modern convention. This is South Farm Solar Park, one of the most significant renewable energy developments in Dorset. It's a 49.9 megawatt ground-mounted solar installation, developed and operated by Voltalia UK Limited. The site covers roughly 130 acres and became fully operational in 2022 after several years of planning, financing and construction. The project was supported by a £25 million loan from Santander, secured after a detailed technical review by the renewable energy consultancy Natural Power, who carried out regular site inspections during the building phase to ensure compliance with engineering standards. South Farm Solar Park has a corporate power purchase agreement, or PPA, with the City of London Corporation, signed in November 2020. The agreement made the project one of the first major UK solar farms to supply a large municipal authority directly. Under the 15-year contract, South Farm provides over half of the City Corporation's electricity needs, powering major sites such as Tower Bridge, Hampstead Heath, the Barbican Centre and the Guildhall. The site is expected to operate for up to 35 years. During construction, Voltalia invested more than £1 million in suppliers located within 25 miles of the site. Across the southwest, the company has spent more than £4 million on local partnerships linked to South Farm and its other regional projects. The firm also supported nearby organisations during the build phase.
For example, it helped restore Spetisbury Primary School's car park using recycled construction materials and hosted an educational day for pupils too. The story here begins with the deep prehistory of Spetisbury Rings, an Iron Age fort that once guarded the river crossing and later revealed evidence of violent conflict during the railway excavations of the 1850s. By the medieval period, the parish had formed around 3 distinct settlements and a Benedictine priory. Today, the long tradition of ecclesiastical presence continues through St John the Baptist Church with its 12th century arcade, 15th century tower and its Tudor tomb. Across the centuries, it moulded thanks to new forces. Even the 21st century has left its mark through projects such as South Farm Solar Park. Spetisbury's story is one of steady adaptation, shaped by the river, the land and the people who have lived along the Store for centuries.
We cut through chalk where the fort once crowned the spur. A single rampart watching where the river would stir. Steel met bone beneath our feet, a clash long swept away. Spearheads in the ditch fill marking one dark day. We breathe the weight of every find beneath this Dorset sky. Unearthed remains that ask us why. Spetisbury, we stand on ground that keeps its secrets deep, where the rings still guard the valleys sweep, where the rampart falls and the river bends, and the past calls out through the work of our friends. Spetisbury, we read the clues we see in the bones that lay by the old earthworks lead. The railway carved its cutting through the fort's northeastern side, and there we found the fallen, placed where they had died. A sword of bronze cauldron, spearheads by their frame, a clash of tribes or Romans, no one left to name. We trace the marks of violence, set in chalk and clay, trying to piece the scene that shaped that day. Spetisbury, we stand on ground that keeps its secrets deep, where the rings still guard the valleys sweep, where the rampart falls and the river bends, and the past calls out through the work of our friends. Spetisbury, we read the clues we see in the bones that lay by the old earthworks lead. The spur above the river holds its ancient line, a place where watchers looked out for any sign. Now only walkers tread the path where warriors stood, but the fort still shapes this village and its wood. Spetisbury, we stand on ground that keeps its secrets deep, where the rings still guard the valleys sweep, where the rampart falls and the river bends, and the past calls out through the work of our friends. Spetisbury, we read the clues we see in the bones that lay by the old earthworks lead. Let the fort remain and the valley stay as we honor those found beside the railway. Oh, Spetisbury, oh, Spetisbury, hey, Spetisbury.
Hello folks, welcome back to Dorset again for the biggest village we've covered so far this week. Spetisbury yesterday was fairly big, but most of that was me trying to climb the hill up to Spetisbury Rings, which wasn't easy. Anyway, hopefully there's nothing quite as difficult in this episode. This is a big old village though, and it's got a lot to tell us about agricultural rural life out here in Dorset. In particular, we'll be talking a bit about a factory this place used to have. This is Sturminster Marshall.
Sturminster Marshall, church on the Strong River belonging to the Marshall family. For your Wednesday offering this week, I've got Sturminster Marshall, again in the Store Valley and on the river of the same name. Like Spetisbury, the river crossing at Sturminster Marshall would have been a useful point for movement here. By the early medieval period, a settlement had formed beside the River Store. The fertile land and the river crossing encouraged farming and small clusters of houses. Those houses would form the basis of Sturminster Marshall, and boy has it grown since. The name Sturminster comes from Old English and means the minster on the River Store. The second part, Marshall, was added after William Marshall, the Earl of Pembroke, received the manor in 1204. That created the full name Sturminster Marshall. The village appears in the Domesday Book under the name Sturminstra. It was recorded as a settled and productive place with farmland, households and resources linked to the River Store. Over the centuries, the manor passed through several families. For many centuries, farming shaped daily life. Now there's something you'd never have guessed. The river provided water for livestock and crops, and the surrounding fields supported dairies. Do you ever get the feeling you've heard some of this before? Well, here's something you haven't. Dairy farming was to be extremely important here. In 1888, Henry Torrey founded the Bailey Gate factory, which dealt with milk, cheese and whey. It became one of the largest cheese factories anywhere in Europe, and it even had its own railway station. Now that's interesting. As well as dairy farming, by the early 1900s the village had a busy high street and a growing industrial area around Bailey Gate. Farming continued, but the dairy factory was the major employer. Not so now. Today, important landmarks include what remains of the former factory site, as well as what remains of the old station that served it. St Mary's Church, the River Store and the Store Valley Way are all key features of Sturminster Marshall too, though. The village also has two pubs, a playing field, a memorial hall and several historic buildings that show its long past. The most historically significant figure linked to the parish is William Marshall, the Earl of Pembroke, and there haven't been many since. So in short, this one is a mixture of old industry, old railway history, medieval buildings and their modern counterparts. It's all based in a pretty little village, one which could so easily be mistaken for a small town. It's become that big these days. Let's have a walk around it and see exactly what Sturminster Marshall has to offer. To get into Sturminster Marshall from Spetisbury, you have to use the A350. On that road, you'll pass one of the two pubs this place has to its name. It's called the Fox. This has served travellers for centuries, originating as it did as a roadside inn. Today, it's more of a traditional pub with a garden, parking and classic food offerings. It serves 2 changing cask ales and has long opening hours, typical of a well-used rural pub. These details may be somewhat contemporary, but they do echo the long traditions of similar licensed premises in Dorset.
Okay, so there's another pub as well that Sturminster Marshall has got. You can see it behind me there, that's the Red Lion. We'll talk about that in a moment. First of all, we need to discuss the church, because that's dead opposite the Red Lion. I'm standing in the churchyard here. The church is hiding away behind that tree over there. Let's get started.
Stop number 1 in the village is St Mary's Church, and this stands on ground with more than 8 centuries of recorded history. Its structure shows work from the 12th century through to the Victorian period. It's a Grade 1 listed building. Although it appears medieval at first glance, mostly this is in fact a product of the early 19th century. The north arcade is one of the clearest signs of the original Norman building, but there are others. The Norman font, still present today, is carved from a single block of stone. During the 1200s, the church underwent major enlargement. The chancel was extended eastwards and the north aisle was lengthened. Further changes took place in the 1300s when the north aisle was extended again, probably through the addition of a wider chapel. In the late 1400s, the aisle was rebuilt and widened, and the south wall of the nave was reconstructed. The porch was rebuilt in 1720. The most dramatic changes came in the mid-19th century, when the church underwent a major restoration under the architect Henry Woodyer. Woodyer was known for his Gothic revival style, and his work at St Mary's included heightening the tower, rebuilding the porch again, adding a vestry, and opening a new arch between the chancel and the north aisle. He also refitted some of the windows and raised the north aisle too. Woodyer's restoration was considered by some to be over-energetic, but it left the church with some amazing Victorian features, including a white and gold chancel screen, a barrel roof, and high-quality stained glass typical of the period. These days, there are 4 bells here, including examples from the 14th and 15th centuries. The churchyard contains the base and shaft of an old stone cross, as well as a mutilated stone coffin, both noted in an antiquarian report from 1910. The visit was made by the Dorset Natural History and Antiquarian Field Club and noted some valuable details about the church's interior. The vicar at the time, Reverend James Cross, had served for 33 years and had collected portraits of previous vicars dating back to 1745. The report also mentions a 17th century funeral helm displayed high on a wall and a chalice believed to be one of the latest surviving pieces of pre-Reformation communion plate. There's no question this church was good at preserving historical objects. Pub number 2 is the Red Lion on Church Street, opposite St Mary's Church. Modern listings describe it as a traditional country pub offering food, drink and a large garden, but its roots go back much further. While the exact founding date of the Red Lion Inn is not known, the building appears in local historical trails and village heritage notes. One example of that is the Sturminster Marshall Jubilee Trail, which documents historic sites across the village. The pub's location opposite the church suggests maybe a medieval or early post-medieval origin. Inns were commonly placed near churches, bridges and market spaces, and Sturminster Marshall has all 3. TripAdvisor records it today as the oldest and most prominent pub in the village. The building's appearance, with its white walls, pitched roof and traditional signage, matched the style of many 17th to 19th century inns. Its large garden suggests that the pub once had some attached land to it too. A few steps away is the old school. This was built in 1799. Its official address is 172 Church Street, the same address listed for the Mackerel charity, which maintains the village's historical archive. The charity is named after William Mackerel, whose family supported education and welfare here. There's no denying that Sturminster Marshall's population in the 19th century was large enough to support a school, and the village's central position between Blandford Forum and Poole made it an important local centre. However, times change, and things certainly did here. As new school buildings were constructed in many Dorset villages, older schoolhouses often took on new roles. Here in Sturminster Marshall, formal schooling moved elsewhere, and we'll see where it went later. The old school, though, continued to be used. It became sort of like a village hall, which local organisations could use as they needed to. Part of the reason it survived is down to the charity, because it still uses the old school as its base. Today, it remains one of the most recognisable historic buildings here, and so very important too.
Okay, quite a lot covered already, and we haven't really gone very far. Well, didn't really need to, because the church, the pub and the old school, they're all in like one little area. Well, now we need to walk to the south. You can see behind me there's a junction. We're going to take the right hand fork here, because this will take us to an old chapel, and then beyond that we're into some of the housing here in Sturminster Marshall.
The former chapel on Front Lane, also known as the Wesleyan Methodist Chapel, is another well-recorded building here in Sturminster Marshall. It appears in multiple historical sources and remains one of the most identifiable structures in the historic core. The chapel was built in 1875 and opened for worship in 1876. For more than 130 years, the chapel served as the main Methodist place of worship in Sturminster Marshall. Methodist records confirm that it remained active until 2008. During that period, the chapel would have hosted Sunday services, weekday meetings and seasonal events typical of rural Methodist practice. Although detailed attendance figures are not known, its long operational lifespan indicates it had a stable congregation. The Village History Archive at the old school has a rather quirky fact about this. The archive contains a historic photograph from around 1900, which is incorrectly labelled. It misidentifies this as the village school. It was later corrected by the local historian Mark Churchill. After closing as a place of worship in 2008, the chapel was converted into a holiday let in 2010. The owners noted that the building remained important to them personally, as their son was baptised here before its closure. There's another chapel to speak of next, the Congregational Chapel, which stood here on Station Road. The Village History Archive does indeed confirm that a congregational chapel was established in the village during the 19th century, but you won't find it here today. The building no longer survives, and not much is really known about it. The exact closure date is not recorded anywhere, but local historians do know that the building has ceased religious use by the late 20th century, and it was later removed. Yeah, some nice properties here in Sturminster Marshall. We've seen a couple of nice thatched buildings already. You see those all over Dorset. There are some grander ones, like this one here, for example. That's a mighty fine house, isn't it? There's a nice mixture, actually, of modern and ancient in this place. It's quite good. Now, speaking of modern, our next job is to find our way to the sports ground. There's another junction coming up here. We need to take a left turn, and that's where the sports area is. Time to cross the sports area next, which has grown steadily over the past century. Before this existed, local recreation was limited to open green spaces such as Timber Green, Stocks Green and Walnut Tree Field. None of them, though, were formal sports grounds. This is. The growth of the village during the early 20th century increased demand for organised recreation, and open land near the centre of Sturminster Marshall began to be used more formally for sport. The locals know it today as Churchill Close. This is the product of long-term development rather than a single moment of creation. Its history is tied to the village's geography, its transport links, and its steady growth over time. It was chosen because it was level, accessible, and outside the flood-prone areas of the village, closer to the river. Next, we have the Village Hall, which officially is known better as the Memorial Hall. This is one of the most frequently mentioned public buildings in modern descriptions of Sturminster Marshall, and it has a recorded history that stretches across several decades. This is not the original hall. A predecessor existed before 1996, and that was demolished to make way for this new building. The rebuilding was undertaken with the help of lottery funding, and ever since it's served the village well, because it's very versatile. It hosts sports sessions, meetings and classes throughout the year, and its location opposite the playing fields makes it a natural base for most of those. It also has a large indoor space which allows it to operate in all weathers. It's a pretty decent sized playground here as well. There's lots of facilities for the kids here in Sturminster-Marshall. I've just been thinking to myself that this is the kind of village that I can proper get on with, because I grew up in a village just like this, with some wide open spaces in the centre of it and houses around the edge, and it just brings back a few memories for me, quite frankly. I mean, I know it was a long way away from here in Lincolnshire, but even so, you know, they do have villages like that down here in Dorset too, you know. In terms of shops, Sturminster Marshall has two main ones. Here's the Spar store on Station Road. Now, even though this is a modern business, it simply would not exist today had Sturminster Marshall not been industrially active. The next section will show us how. This is a small industrial estate these days, but here you're looking at the former site of Sturminster Marshall's massive dairy operation and the industry that grew around it. Its history is well recorded, and so too is that of the station which served it. Where this estate is now, there was Bailey Gate railway station, and it served the Somerset and Dorset joint railway line for more than a century. It opened in 1860 under the name Sturminster Marshall, built by the Dorset Central Railway, which later became part of the S&D JR. In 1863, the station was renamed Baileygate to avoid confusion with Sturminster Newton, which was another station on the same line. It was the first station north of Wimborne. It had two platforms, a goods yard and several sidings. Now, its most important role was serving the dairy. United Dairies, which later became Unigate, had a huge milk and cheese factory here, which was founded by Henry Torrey in 1888. The factory soon grew into one of the largest cheese-producing sites in Europe. As a result of that, the station became one of the biggest milk depots on the British railway network. Milk was loaded into tanker wagons and transported daily to London. Sugar beet was also shipped from the station to refineries. Given it was so busy, Baileygate needed a practical layout for heavy freight use, and it did. The station included a waiting room, a ticket office, a lampshed, a signal box, a wooden crossing linking the platforms, and access paths from both the eastern and western sides of the line. The station also had a road bridge immediately to the north, known as Bridge number 220, which carried local traffic over the line. The bridge appears in several surviving photographs of the station, some of which you can see at the old school in the archives. The line through Baileygate was originally single track, but was later doubled, increasing capacity for both passenger and freight trains. It remained that way until 1966, when, as part of the beaching cuts, it closed. The line was lifted in 1970. The station buildings were demolished and the site was redeveloped as the modern industrial estate you see now. It's still known as Baileygate though. As for the dairy, that also closed later in the 20th century, but its influence on the village remains well documented.
Okay, so our next job is to go and find the school, which is sort of behind the camera, and after that we'll take ourselves across the golf course because there's a public right-of-way that runs over that, and that effectively takes us back to the start. We won't be finished with the episode at that point though, because there's still quite a bit to cover to the south and sort of west of the village. There's a few hamlets that this one has within its boundaries. Nice place though, isn't it?
So, as we mentioned earlier, Sturminster school children now attend a different place of education, and this is it. Sturminster Marshall First School has more than a century of recorded history, beginning in the early 20th century and developing alongside major changes in village life. According to the school's own historical record, the building was constructed in 1911, only a few years after the founding of the dairy. This makes sense. The dairy brought workers, and with them came more and more children. The old school was simply too small. More than a century on from its construction, this school has seen several new additions and alterations. It now has a purpose-built library, discrete learning rooms, and something called a lodge, which is an extra building used for groups and activities. The school grounds also have expanded. The site now includes a large field, a playground, and a range of play equipment. Sturminster Marshall Golf Club next, and this is on Moor Lane at the eastern side of the village. It's known for its 9-hole course, its driving range, and its training facilities. It's all operated by a company formally incorporated on the 14th of June 2006. Although the company dates from then, golf has been played on this site since much earlier. Although it only has 9 holes, each one has 2 tee positions, allowing golfers to play a full round with varied angles and distances. The course is set among mature trees, lakes and open fairways.
It's a nice day today, so the ground is drying out, but it was raining yesterday, so this grass is not the most pleasant thing to walk on right now. It's a bit wet, but we manage. Now, the golf course, as you can see there, takes up quite a bit of room here in Sturminster Marshall, and we're not going all the way over there. This path basically just skirts the edge of it. It turns left in a moment, and we go across another little field that's got a name that I can't remember offhand, but it takes us back to the road, and then effectively that road is what will lead us back to the church, the old school, and the Red Lion where we began.
We are not done yet. Sturminster Marshall is a very big parish in terms of the land it covers. Aside from the village, it extends outwards to the village of Alma these days, and the hamlet of Mapperton, which is next to it. Driving out to Alma means we make a return to the Winterbourne Valley, and tomorrow we'll once again be seeing villages with that name. The name Alma comes from the Saxon word Aelmere, which referred to an eel pond located to the southeast of the village. By the early 13th century, the name appears in records as Almere. It has two main buildings of note. One is the church, which we'll get a close look at in a moment. The other is Alma Manor, an Elizabethan building that stands near the church and can be seen through a row of trees. Also of note here is the 7-mile-long wall of Charborough Park, which borders the area. It's one of the longest estate walls in England and gives Alma a distinctive landscape feature that dates back centuries. In 1931, Alma had a recorded population of 108 people. That figure confirms that the village was very small, even by rural Dorset standards. 2 years later, Alma ceased to be a separate civil parish and was merged with Sturminster Marshall. It only has 7 residential properties today, all of which are owned and let by the Charborough estate. It all lies just off the A31, closer to Winterbourne Zelston than it is to Sturminster Marshall. St Mary's Church in Alma stands beside the long boundary wall of the Charborough estate and is one of the most historically important small churches in the county. It's Grade 1 listed, and that's a status that was given to it in 1955. The building is 11th century in origin. The earliest surviving structural parts date from the mid-12th century, including the nave and the north arcade, which has scalloped capitals and carved heads in the spandrels. Inside the church is a 13th century Purbeck marble font, shaped like a chalice. It stands on the inverted bowl of an older font, making it a rare example of 2 medieval fonts used together. The base of the earlier font can still be seen in the churchyard. During the 14th century, the church underwent major changes. The north aisle was rebuilt and the nave was raised, giving the building a more spacious interior. The period also saw the addition of new windows and structural strengthening. Arthur Mee, writing in the King's England Dorset, described the tower as embattled and praised its fine arch. The tower is one of the most impressive parts of the building and is typical of late medieval Dorset. One of the most unusual features of St Mary's is its Swiss glass. Part of that includes a Last Judgment panel dated 1610. In 1910, the rector, Reverend Baron Hitchins, said he'd once been offered £100 per panel for it. He believed it was brought from Antwerp by a member of the Drax family who collected art for Charborough.
Beautiful church is that, and if you stand in the churchyard or indeed on this road, you can see the long wall which we drove past a moment ago to get to this church, the estate wall of Charborough. Now we're going to make our way back towards that wall, but we're not going that way. Instead, we're going to drive through the rest of Alma, which isn't much to be fair, into Mapperton, which is another village, well, hamlet, that's also within the boundaries, and that'll take us to something called the World's End, which is a pub.
Now to drive through Mapperton. This developed as a small medieval settlement, and today it can be defined as a shrunken medieval village. The medieval settlement covered about 3 acres and lay southeast of the road junction in the modern village. Therefore, there are earthworks here, and they include building platforms, rectangular enclosures, and a holloway, all visible in aerial photographs. Tofts, or house plots, survive on the northern side of the road, with larger enclosures on the southern side. By the early modern period, Mapperton had reduced to a small group of farms and cottages. Quarry pits and spoil heaps lie near the medieval earthworks, showing that small-scale extraction took place in the area after the medieval decline. Mapperton historically lay within the old parish of Alma, and that's why today it's linked with Sturminster Marshall. Again, it sits away from major roads, and that fact has helped to preserve the medieval earthworks. As we leave Alma and Mapperton, there are two more things we have to mention. This is the schoolhouse which stands beside the A31. A board school serving Winterbourne, Zelston and Alma was built in 1882, designed to hold 76 children. This is not that building. This is its replacement, which opened in 1925 and continued until 1964, when it closed due to falling numbers and changes in local education planning. After closure, the schoolhouse remained as one of the few buildings in Alma still linked to its earlier life. Just down the road from the schoolhouse is another pub. This is the World's End, widely regarded as one of the oldest pubs in the county. Several sources, including those linked to the Charborough estate and camera, state that the building dates back to the 14th century. Early records suggest that the pub was the first in Dorset to hold a beer licence, marking it as an important site for travellers on the old route between Wimborne and Beer Regis. During the 17th and 18th centuries, the pub gained a reputation as a smuggler's haunt. Contraband from the Purbeck coast was moved inland through this area, and the building contained escape routes, including what was described as a highwayman's bolt hole. A bread oven beside a large inglenook fireplace also survived into the 20th century, before later damage. The pub also held a Gilbert and Baker licence, which allowed it to host auctions and bake bread. Later, the World's End became well known among Royal Navy personnel. Sailors travelling between Portsmouth and Plymouth often stopped here, and many left their names on the walls. One of the most persistent stories linked to the pub is the claim that Winston Churchill and Dwight D. Eisenhower met here to discuss preparations for D-Day. This tale grew in popularity after the Second World War. Later clarifications showed that General Montgomery did indeed visit the pub, but it was after returning from Dunkirk while overseeing defence arrangements for Hampshire and Dorset, not during D-Day planning. A major turning point came in 1991 here, when the building was destroyed by a fire. The Charborough estate records show that the pub was rebuilt in the style of the original, keeping its thatched exterior, timber features and traditional layout. Today, the World's End remains a large thatched roadside pub with a long bar divided into two sections. It sits at the end of the estate boundary wall, close to the well-known Stag Gate, a landmark topped by the rumoured five-legged stag. That was a real journey, wasn't it? That's the largest and most interesting village we've covered so far in Dorset, and it's not just Sturminster Marshall that has all the best bits. The outlying hamlets add a real depth of character here. Each has its own history of manor houses, cottages and agricultural buildings, yet all of them share the same long relationship with the Store Valley and or the Winterbourne Valley. Modern Sturminster Marshall has grown, but it has kept a clear sense of its past. Sturminster Marshall's history is not a single story, but a set of linked strands that continue to define it into the modern day. Milk and cheese may no longer be produced at Baileygate, but the remnants of that food-based industry will live with the village for many a long year to come.
Sidings where the tankers wait, steam drifting over crates of milk at Baileygate. Henry Torrey's place roaring, churn stacked high and warm, cheese wheels turning while freight rolls past the yard. And every crate I lift reminds me why I'm here, a village built on work like this, year after year. Through every long shift I know this place is mine. Baileygate power in the day, strong as any sign. Milk bound for London, while the factory keeps its soul. I'm singing proudly as the wagons roll. Sturminster Marshall, the rhythm of the rails goes on. Cheese in the cool rooms, tankers pulling out at dawn. Whatever comes next, I'll keep this craft alive. Baileygate driving the beat, help helping us all thrive. When the whistle ends my shift, I walk by St. Mary's Tower. Norman stonework standing firm with quiet power. Past the old school walls, lessons shape the village way, and chapels where the hymns once rang every day. Every path I take reminds me what we've made, a place where work and faith and learning never fade. Through every long shift, I know this place is mine. Bailey Gate powering the day, strong as any sign. Milk bound for London, while the factory keeps its soul. I'm singing proudly as the wagons roll. Sturminster Marshall, the rhythm of the rails goes on. Cheese in the cool rooms, tankers pulling out at dawn. Whatever comes next, I'll keep this craft alive. Bailey Gate driving the beat, helping us all thrive. Out by Elmer's Church, beneath the long estate wall, and Mapperton's old earthworks where the past still calls, I think about the workers who shaped this place before. Small homes, old fields and tracks that meet the store. Sturminster Marshall, hey, yeah, can you feel it? Tony's milk, cheese and whey. Sturminster Marshall, it belongs to me. To Bailey Gate for my work every day. Sturminster Marshall, the rhythm of the rails goes on. Cheese in the cool rooms, tankers pulling out at dawn. Whatever comes next, I'll keep this craft alive. Bailey Gate driving the beat, helping us all thrive.
Hello people, welcome back to Dorset once again, and welcome back to the Winterbourne Valley. I just couldn't stay away, could I? Now, when we were last in the Winterbourne Valley, which for me was yesterday, but for you was 2 weeks ago, it was a dreary, horrible kind of day with rain lashing down, wasn't it? Well, today, it's a little bit different, isn't it? We've got a blue sky, it's going to look fantastic, and hopefully this place will show you what a Winterbourne Valley village looks like when the sun comes out. This is the beautiful Winterbourne Zelston. Winterbourne Zelston, Chelston's farm on the Winter Stream. Today on TVI we return to the Winterbourne Valley again, where we're about to tackle the rather exotic sounding Winterbourne Zelston. Now, if you've seen our first foray into this valley, you won't need a reminder of some of this. It's very much a cut and paste job. By the early medieval period, a series of small settlements had formed here along the Winterbourne Stream. So far we've seen Houghton, Stickland, Clenston, Whitechurch and Kingston, and all of them are prefixed with the name Winterbourne. The name Winterbourne refers to a stream that flows only in the winter. Zelston comes from the Old English personal name Chelston or Chenston, meaning Chelston's farm or Chenston's farm. Over time, several variations of spelling have appeared out here. Winterbourne Zelston became a recognised parish in the medieval period. It formed part of the Hundred of Pimperne and later the registration district of Blandford. The parish church, dedicated to St Mary, stood at the centre of the settlement as it still does today. After Doomsday, the manor passed through several families. In the 12th and 13th centuries it was held by the Zelston family, but later it was owned by the Turbervilles, the Pleydels and the Drax families. We're familiar with all of those now. From the 16th to the 18th centuries, Winterbourne Zelston remained a small village. The stream provided seasonal water, and the surrounding fields supported dairy cattle and arable crops. Houses were built in cob and thatch, typical of rural Dorset.
See, I told you it was mostly similar. In the 1800s, the village saw modest growth. The church was restored and new cottages appeared along the main road. Census records still show a small population, usually between 150 and 250 people, with most working in agriculture or domestic service. During the early 1900s, Winterbourne-Zelston still remained rural. Farming continued to dominate daily life and the village layout changed little. The main road between Blandford and Bere Regis brought some traffic, but generally it stayed quiet. Today, important landmarks include St Mary's Church, the Winterbourne Stream, some historic cottages and Zelston Farm. The church tower is still the most recognisable feature of the village itself, but there's also a few bits of note outside it. One of those is the Red Post, which we'll see in tomorrow's video, but Winterbourne-Zelston has Red Post services. We'll cover those too while we're here, and we'll also learn a bit about how this small village in rural Dorset has ties to Australia. Let's go. We begin this short walk around the village at the Methodist Chapel. Its story is closely tied to the rise of primitive Methodism in rural Dorset. This chapel began with the purchase of a small meadow called Killitkins in 1835 for £25. The land had once been an orchard and was bought from the executors of Daniel Coward. The purchase was made specifically so that a primitive Methodist chapel could be built. The trustees named in the deed were a group of yeomen. Namely, they were Joseph Roberts, Charles Lanning, Robert Compton, Joseph Palmer, Stephen Butt and George Butt. Also part of the group was Maurice Stainer, but he wasn't a yeoman. Instead, he was a basket maker. Construction followed soon after. Parish records state that the chapel was built in 1836 and later purchased outright in 1854. In 1837, part of the land was transferred to Betty Compton, daughter of trustee Robert, in return for £10 lent towards the building costs. The chapel remained active for more than a century. A notable event came in 1951, when the primitive Methodist chapel at Charlton Marshall was sold. Part of the proceeds was given to Winterbourne-Zelston for refurbishment. It then entered a new phase of its life as the village hall. St Mary's Church stands in the centre of Winterbourne-Zelston. The oldest surviving part of the church is the 15th century west tower, built of rubble stone and designed in 3 stages with a battlemented parapet. The tower's survival suggests that the medieval church once had a larger footprint, though no full record of that earlier layout survives today. The tower arch inside the church dates from the 15th century too. That means the tower was once part of a more substantial structure. The rest of the church was rebuilt in 1866 under the architect Thomas Henry Wyatt. He reused some older materials, but introduced a new plan with a nave, a north aisle, a chancel, a south vestry and a south porch. The rebuild used flint and stone banding. Wyatt's work gave everything a more uniform Gothic style. He introduced a canted wagon roof in the chancel, arch-braced collar beams in the nave and trussed rafters with curved braces in the aisle. Several medieval elements were kept though. St Mary's now belongs to the Diocese of Salisbury and is part of the parish grouping Winterbourne-Zelston with Thompson and Anderson. The grouping therefore links it with St Andrew's Church at Winterbourne-Thompson, which is now cared for by the church's Conservation Trust. We'll see that building tomorrow.
Are you ready for something that looks really, really picturesque? Here's the River Winterbourne again. And there's a little bridge here, which you can, I'm assuming you're allowed to cross, I don't know. But even if not, it doesn't matter. There's the Winterbourne just gliding its way past the village and past the church as well. It's right next to the church once again. Remember we said that 2 weeks ago. This road was very close to the church. It's quite deep here as well. Look at this. Look how deep it is just here. Mind you, it is very swollen at the moment, what with all the rain we've had recently.
We've reached the A31. In front of us here is the only pub in the village. Named the Botany Bay Inn, it was built in the 1920s by the Dorset brewery Hall and Woodhouse. It was constructed on land supplied by the local squire. Now this is well away from the village centre, but that was by design. The squire, although willing to supply the land, insisted that the pub be placed away from the centre of the village on purpose so that he wouldn't have to see it. What a miserable git. When it opened, the pub was not originally called the Botany Bay Inn. Its original name was the General Allenby, named after Edmund Allenby. He was a British field marshal, known for his role in the Middle East during the First World War. The pub gained its current name in the 1980s. Camera records explain that the change was inspired by the history of the Red Post, a site about a quarter of a mile from the inn. By extension, it was also linked to Australia. You see, the Red Post marked a stopping point for prisoners from Dorchester Prison who were being taken to ships for transportation to Botany Bay in Australia. Those who could not continue the journey were executed at the site. It's a grim bit of history, really. Transportation from Dorset to Australia is well documented in county histories, and the route from Dorchester towards Poole passed close to Winterbourne Zelston. The Red Post, therefore, served as a practical overnight halt for prisoners before they were marched onward.
Okay, there's no footpath here along this road, but there is a bus stop which I can walk through just for a moment before we then turn right back into Winterbourne Zelston to form the loop around the village. Don't try this yourself, people. Hi Biz, coming in clutch this morning.
Back into the village now. The old post office is our final stop on the walk. The building itself is typical of rural Dorset structures from the 18th or 19th centuries, often built in stone or brick with simple domestic features. Postal services in rural Dorset have changed over time as transport has improved. The main reason for that here is all to do with the Somerset and Dorset Joint Railway. The station at Baileygate at Sturminster Marshall made mail delivery faster. Even so, local post offices remained important collection points until later 20th century reforms centralised services. Many small Dorset post offices closed during these changes, and Winterbourne Zelston's old post office eventually ceased operation.
And the house that was the post office is now called Brookside Cottage, apparently. Now, just before we finish the walk here around Winterbourne Zelston, there's one more thing I want to show you. It's this cross here. There's a little plaque underneath it, and it reads, "This medieval stone cross was placed here in its previous site in 1977 to mark the Silver Jubilee of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. And a very nice place for it too, right next to the Winterbourne. Now, before we finish this episode off, I've got a bit of driving to do. We're going to out of the village to Red Post Services.
Right, so we've discussed the history of the Red Post and its links to the Botany Bay Inn, but we won't see the actual post until tomorrow. Winterbourne Zelston, however, does have Red Post services beside the A31. The site developed over several decades and became well known because of its roadside facilities and the long presence of a Little Chef restaurant. The first modern structure on the site was a bungalow built next to the A31. A workshop followed in 1978. Plans for a filling station and a restaurant were proposed in 1981, and the filling station opened soon afterwards. The restaurant arrived in 1986 as a branch of Happy Eater, beside the filling station serving one of Dorset's busiest east-to-west roads. In 1996, the Happy Eater was converted into that Little Chef. The restaurant operated for more than 20 years and became a familiar stop for drivers heading between Wimborne, Bere Regis and Dorchester. The site then experienced several changes in the 2000s. In 2011, the Little Chef was the target of an armed robbery too. 2 staff members were tied up and the attackers escaped using one of the restaurant's vehicles. Crazily, there were no arrests for that. By the time Euro Garages had bought Little Chef out, they couldn't keep the name. As a result, the Winterbourne-Zelston site was rebranded as an EG Diner in 2018. It closed later that year due to low trade. The filling station also shut down later that year. By 2019, the entire site was empty, and barring a brief spell during the COVID-19 lockdown, where the forecourt was briefly used by a small snack bar, it was to all intents and purposes dead. That was until redevelopment began in 2021. The Little Chef building was demolished and a new forecourt building was constructed. It opened in December 2022 as an Asda-branded BP station with a Greggs and a Leon Coffee. There was a drive-through unit as well, which was also built, intended at first for a Starbucks, but later planned as a Leon drive-through instead. So that's Winterbourne-Zelston, and you really have to admit that one's got far more than it looks. The thing is, you can't fully understand this one on its own without considering the other small villages around it. Tomorrow we're going to the next parish over, where we'll get to see the Red Post, and that'll complete the story of the services and the Botany Bay Inn. The rest of the village though is brilliant in its own little way. The line of the Winterbourne still defines it, much as it did in earlier centuries. Winterbourne-Zelston has stayed small, with numbers rarely rising above 170. It's that stability though that's helped preserve its rural character, even as nearby towns expanded.
Drift through chalk and meadow ground, a stream that hides in summer then returns without a sound. St. Mary's tower stands firm, the chapel keeps its place, and cabin that still shape this small Dorset space. But change keeps knocking at my door, and I keep guarding what came before. So keep that in out of my sight, build it far beyond my view. Take all its bustle while the village stays as true as the tower in the winter water. That's the way I always knew. The yeomen raised their chapel, the farmers worked the fields, the riverbed held insects waiting for the season's yield. Then traffic roared along the 31 sweep, and talk began a veil and cheer where I preferred my peace to keep. I said place it where the hedgerows thin, let the world pass by but don't crowd in. So keep that in out of my sight, build it far beyond my view. Let the road take all its bustle while the village stays as true as the tower in the winter water. That's the way I always knew. Red post stands with tales of travel, prison marches harsh and stark. Botany Bay gave that in its name, but I kept my distance, kept my mark. So keep that in out of my sight, build it far beyond my view. Let the road take all its bustle while the village stays as true as the tower in the winter water. That's the way I always knew.
Hello folks, welcome back to Dorset for the last episode this year, but don't despair Dorset fans, there will be more to come over the next God knows how many years. I'm not done with this county yet by a long way. Now, to finish off, I have this for you. Now look at this, you can see a road junction. In front of us there is a road we're very familiar with. We saw it at the end of the Winterbourne Zelston episode yesterday. Yes indeed, that is the A31. Now behind this sign here, there's another sign and it's coloured red. You might remember if you watched yesterday's episode, that's the red post. Let's explain why it gets its colour. This is the parish of Anderson. Anderson, Andrew's farm. And finally, for now, we have the parish of Anderson in the lower Winterbourne Valley. In theory, this should be called Winterbourne-Anderson, but it's not, and hopefully the reasons for that will become clear by the end of this video. The name Anderson appears in medieval records as Andrewston, which likely means Andrew's farm or Andrew's settlement. Another early name for it is Vifhasher or Fiveash, and that appears in records from the reign of Edward II. That still survives today in the name of a cottage. The alternative name, Winterbourne-Anderson, refers to the seasonal stream running north of the churchyard. Anderson became a recognised parish in the medieval period. It later formed part of the ecclesiastical parish of Winterbourne-Zelston with Thompson and Anderson. After the time of Doomsday, the manor passed to the Turberville family, before in 1450 it was taken over by the Morton family of Milbourne St Andrew. They began building the present manor house in 1613, and that today is one of the village's greatest treasures. Before the Mortons completed the house, they sold the estate to John Tregonwell of Milton Abbas. It was he who would finish the manor in 1622. The Tregonwells were a powerful Dorset family, and Anderson became one of their key residences. Anderson Manor is now considered one of the finest small Jacobean manor houses in England. It's built of dark red brick with stone dressings, high gables, mullioned windows and tall chimneys. The house later served as a commando headquarters during World War II. The Church of St Michael here is now redundant, but it has medieval origins. It served the village for many centuries and stands near the Winterbourne stream. Together with the manor house, it forms the core of the settlement, and the layout has changed very little. Anderson also has another village within its boundaries, despite its size. That would be Winterbourne-Thompson. In 1933, the parish of Anderson was formally created in its current guise by merging Anderson and Thompson together. For centuries, Anderson remained a small farming place. The court leet was held each year around Martinmas until about 1905. A town crier would walk the village with a bell to announce the court, and the lord of the manor inspected cottages for repairs afterwards. The most notable figure linked to Anderson is Lewis Dymote Grosvenor Tregonwell, born in 1758. He later became known as the man who helped establish Bournemouth as a seaside resort. He did a bloody good job of that, didn't he? Let's have a look at it all. Right, before we can get into the villages of Anderson and Winterbourne-Thompson, we have to finish the story of the Red Post, which we started yesterday. This is the actual Red Post itself, and it points towards both villages. It's one of the best known traditional finger posts in England. Dorset once had more than 1,300 of these in the mid-20th century, but less than half survive today due to wartime removals and later road modernisation. The Red Post is unusual because of its colour. Most were white, but a small number were painted red. Only 4 red finger posts are known in the county of Dorset today. Their purpose has been debated for many years, but here the idea behind the colour is well documented. The most repeated explanation for the red paint comes from accounts linked to Botany Bay Farm. That was located a short distance down the lane from the sign. According to local tradition, the farm served as the first overnight stop for prisoners being marched from Dorchester Prison to ships at Portsmouth or Poole for transportation to Australia. Prison officers were said to be illiterate, so the post was painted red to mark the correct turning for the lockup barn.
Loads of Dorset heritage writers record this story, though they note it cannot be proven with any abject certainty. There is another explanation. Some red posts may have marked sites connected with gibbets or executions. However, researchers argue that the Anderson example is more likely linked to the prisoner route because of the surviving shackles once attached to posts at Botany Bay Farm. The Anderson post is often photographed because of its colour, its unusual history and its position beside a major road. It's become a reference point now for walkers, cyclists and drivers travelling between Bere Regis, Wimborne and Blandford Forum.
It's a grim bit of history indeed, but you know what? It is fascinating and I love things like this. I almost, when I planned this episode, I almost didn't come to the red post because I saw it on the map and I thought, well, that's not anything important, surely. Well, how wrong I was, eh? Right, so let's take ourselves now to where this post is pointing us. Anderson is half a mile that way. But as well as Anderson, there's also another village here, which is called Winterbourne-Thompson, and we're going to walk between them both.
Okay, so now we're in the village of Winterbourne-Thompson, and this walk will see us travel from Thompson into Anderson. It's not all that far. Essentially, what we're doing is walking between the two churches. This is St Andrew's, one of the most distinctive small churches in southern England. The building is Grade 1 listed, and it's cared for today by the church's Conservation Trust. Its long history, unusual design and careful restoration make it an important example of Norman architecture in Dorset. Built in the 12th century, the structure is mainly flint with stone dressings, and it has an apsidal east end, which is rare in English parish churches. Most churches of this date have a square-ended chancel, but St Andrew's keeps the rounded form that was common in early Norman times. It has a barrel-vaulted wagon roof which curves around the apse. The roof was added or rebuilt in the 16th century, when the church was repaired and new windows were inserted. The oak door, heavily studded with iron, also dates from that period. Inside, the church has lime-washed walls, a 15th century font and a flagstone floor. The most incredible features, however, come from the early 18th century, when the interior was fitted out with high-quality oak furnishings. They include box pews, a pulpit, a screen, communion rails and a table with barley sugar legs. All of them were provided by William Wake, who later became the Archbishop of Canterbury. Wake grew up in Shatwick, and his family had long-standing ties to the area. The church's Conservation Trust notes that St Andrew's is one of only 4 single-celled Norman churches with an apse in England, and the only one in Dorset. The Trust also records that the church has been altered very little since its construction, apart from the roof and the fittings. By the early 20th century, the church had fallen into serious disrepair and was being used as an animal shelter by a local farmer. Windows were boarded up and the structure was at risk of collapse. The Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings stepped in to save it. To raise funds for repairs, they sold a collection of Thomas Hardy manuscripts, an unusual but effective method of financing the restoration. The work was supervised by A.R. Powis, Secretary of the SPAB, who also restored other historic churches in Dorset. Powis is buried at St Andrew's, and a plaque inside the church records his role in its rescue. The restoration was completed in 1931, and the church regained much of its earlier appearance. Gravestones in the churchyard were removed during the work, leaving only one unmarked tomb. By 1972, St Andrew's was declared redundant. The rest of Winterbourne-Thompson is basically a hamlet. It has an early history though. The name is believed to come from an early landholder named Thomas. The earliest known reference to the settlement appears in 942 AD, when 8 hides of land were owned by the Anglo-Saxon noblewoman Winflade. Winflade was known for leaving one of the earliest surviving wills written by a woman in England. Her daughter, St Elgiva of Shaftesbury, later married King Edmund I. That early record proves that the area around the church had been settled long before the Norman building was ever constructed.
Winterbourne-Thompson is so small it doesn't even have its own village sign, unless you count this, which is at the end of the lane that leads to the church. Winterbourne-Thompson, supplier of top quality farm assured milk, Dairy Crest and British Farm Standard. That's something for it to be famous for, I suppose. That's the lane that runs up to the Red Post. We've already been up there. Anderson is this way. It's got a church of its own. It's also got Anderson Manor.
Now we're in Anderson, and there's a second redundant church here. Dedicated to St Michael, this has medieval origins, though the exact date of the earliest structure is not recorded anywhere. The building that stands today is a mixture of medieval work and later work. The church has a medieval core, a south transept added in 1755, and the rest is a complete rebuilding in 1882 by the architect Walter J. Fletcher of Winbourne. The church is built of flint and stone banding with tiled roofs, stone eave courses and coped gables. One of the most distinctive exterior features is the double stone bellcote at the western end. It's of a type common in small Dorset churches where a full tower was never built or was considered unnecessary. Inside, the church has pine roofs with arch-braced principals in the nave and the transept, and a more elaborate pine roof with cusp-braced principals in the chancel. The fittings are mostly 19th century, including pine pews and a pine pulpit. Another notable interior feature is a circular marble monument to Margaret Gulpine, who died in 1803. It's signed by a J. Brine and dated 1807. The monument shows that the church was still in active use in the early 19th century, and that local families invested in memorials of good quality back then. To understand this church's place in local history, it is useful to look at the development of Anderson Manor, which is almost next door. The manor was held at the time of the Domesday Book by William de Scoles or Stokes. The church's upkeep often depended on the manor's fortunes. Anderson Manor is a Grade 1 listed building and one of the best surviving examples of early 17th century domestic architecture in the country. The house was completed in 1622 for John Tregonwell, who had purchased the estate in 1613 from Sir George Morton. The manor was begun earlier, probably in the 1590s, by Sir John Morton. When Tregonwell acquired the property, he completed the house and established it as his residence after retiring from the Milton Abbey estate in 1624. Perhaps the most well-known member of the Tregonwell family is Lewis Dymoke Grosvenor Tregonwell, born in 1758. It was he who established the seaside resort at Bournemouth, so next time you visit Bournemouth Beach, keep him in mind. The manor building is partly Elizabethan in style, a fact shown by its E-shaped plan. It's built of red brick with stone dressings set on a flint plinth. The use of brick was unusual in Dorset at the time. It has 3 stories, projecting gabled wings, mullioned windows and tall chimneys. The main south front includes an octagonal 3-storey porch, and the house follows a double pile plan, meaning it has 2 parallel roof ranges. A service wing was added at the northwest corner in the late 17th century and later extended westwards. The Tregonwell family held the manor until 1902, after which it was sold to a Mrs. Grattrix. After her death, the contents of the house were auctioned and many original furnishings were lost. Later owners included the Tabors and the Chumleys. In 1975 it was bought by its present owners. Between times, there's a very interesting bit of wartime history to this place. During the Second World War, Anderson Manor was requisitioned by the military. It first served as the headquarters of the Small Scale Raiding Force, or SSRF. That was a unit linked to 62 Commando. The house was used for planning Operation Pinprick, a series of small raids intended to force German forces to divert manpower. In 1943, the SSRF was disbanded and the manor was taken over by the Special Operations Executive, or SOE.
There are plenty of things that I'm going to miss about Dorset when I leave it after this episode, and I think top of that list is the River Winterbourne, which once again gracefully passes through another Winterbourne Valley village.
Finally, before we head to the hills, we have one last little place to cover. This is Winterbourne Muston, which also lies in the parish of Anderson and close to the seasonal River Winterbourne. The name Muston is believed to come from Old English. Muston means mouse farm. During the medieval period, Muston formed part of the manor of Anderson, and so it too passed through several families, including the Turbervilles and the Mortons. By the 16th century, Muston was a small agricultural hamlet with a few farmsteads. Several earthworks near Muston indicate former buildings, suggesting that the hamlet may once have been slightly larger than it is today. The earthworks include platforms and boundary banks that match the layout of medieval farm enclosures. Estate maps from the 17th and 18th centuries held in the Dorset History Centre show Muston as a cluster of agricultural buildings along the lane running between Anderson and Winterbourne Kingston. Field names like Muston Mead and Muston Ground are recorded on them. The 1841 census for Anderson lists Muston as one of the named hamlets. It records several households living in Muston, mostly agricultural labourers and small farmers. Later censuses show from 1851 to 1911 that Muston's population remained low, usually fewer than 30 people. By the late 20th century, Muston was still a very small settlement, consisting mainly of a few houses and farm buildings. The 2001 census recorded the entire parish of Anderson as having only 72 residents, so you can deduce for yourself how many Muston has today. And with Muston driven through, we can officially say that's it for Dorset in 2026. I know, sad times, but there are still loads to do down here on the south coast, so I will be back in the future, several times. These 10 which we've covered on this latest visit have been so very rich, haven't they? The Winterbourne Valley in Dorset is one of the best areas I've ever been to, and you know what? The Store Valley ain't half bad either. We've covered lots of Winterbourne villages, but there are actually still more to come. On the way, we've seen some amazing things and learnt some great stories. Anderson Manor rightfully takes its place among them too. Anderson's long record, preserved buildings, and mostly unchanged landscape rightfully give it a distinct place in Dorset's history.
I see the red post standing, painted bold against the sky, marking out the turning where the waters drag me by. Botany Bay behind us, shackles cold against my skin. Anderson's fields watching as the march begins again. St. Andrew's roof in Thompson, St. Michael's stones ahead. Two churches on this pathway, keeping watch as I tread. Take me down the Red Post Road, where the Winterbourne runs dry, past the manor built for Tregon, well beneath its gables high. Every step a memory of a life I used to know, as the Red Post Road keeps pulling me where I never meant to go. Morton's brickwork glowing, with the walls so proud. Tall chimneys cut the daylight like a warning in a cloud. Soldiers once planned raids there, shadows moving through the hall. And now I pass in silence, hearing shackles as they fall. The winter stream beside me, the flint and stone so near. Two villages behind me, yet the march stays severe. Take me down the Red Post Road, where the Winterbourne runs dry, past the manor built for Tregon, well beneath its gables high. Every step a memory of a life I used to know, as the Red Post Road keeps pulling me where I never meant to go. Mustang's fields lie empty, just the earthworks and the breeze. Old meadows marked on maps once, now they barely stir the trees. Corleat bells long faded, but I swear I feel them ring as I march toward the harbor, where the prison ships still swing. The Red Post stands behind me, its color burning bright, a marker for the lost ones who passed beneath its side. Take me down the Red Post Road, where the Winterbourne runs dry, past the manor built for Tregon, well beneath its gables high. Every step a memory of a life I used to know,
'cause the red post road keeps pulling me where I never meant to go.
Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.